Hello, folks. I'm Josh McGee, and welcome to another edition of the Gateway to Soccer Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I am back after a little bit of a break. I hope everyone had a socially distanced but happy Thanksgiving. Despite the time off, the soccer did not stop. There's just a lot to get to for this episode. No guest this week because of all the stuff I want to get to over the past few weeks and looking ahead towards next week. In terms of the studio today, I'm wearing a Chelsea shirt to commemorate the big win this midweek. Over one shoulder here, I got one of the jerseys from one of the St. Louis Cardinals soccer nights. They always do a good job with those. As you can see, you got the skyline of the city on the front, and of course, that'll tie into one of the bigger stories on this episode. Over my other shoulder here, I've brought back the Argentina home jersey. I wanted to get through my collection before having some repeats, but I just had to do it, had to bring it back for this episode and to help with my opening monologue. But to start, I want to make this point. When a legend of an industry dies, it's really tough to sum up their life and career in just one moment, especially for younger generations who may not have been around during their peak. I think of someone like a Michael Jackson, who I can remember where I was and what I was doing when his death was announced, but I wasn't around for his peak, and you can't really sum up all of the highs and all of the lows of his life and career into just one moment. Recent deaths like Los Angeles Lakers guard Kobe Bryant or actor Chadwick Boseman, a couple guys who were a lot younger, whose careers were kind of through my teenage years and through my young adult years and were really big cultural influences. Again, with all that they've been able to do, all the highs and lows of their careers, you can't really sum up in one moment. But there are those rare times where, when it comes to someone who either tragically passes away or lived a long and happy life, you were able to look back and really sum up all of them in their entirety into just one moment. Last week on November 25th, Argentinian legend Diego Maradona tragically passed away at the age of 60 due to a heart attack. He had recently, a couple weeks ago, underwent emergency brain surgery. It was said to be successful, but all of his health problems throughout all of the years and finally accumulated this month, and unfortunately, he tragically passed away at the age of 60. When it comes to my generation, Diego Maradona, of course, we weren't alive to see his full greatness, to see his playing career and all that he was able to do. Thankfully, we still have YouTube, so we're able to go back and look up clips of his playing career. But unfortunately, most younger people probably know him more as a guy who's crazy, doing crazy stuff in the stands, more so doing crazy stuff on the field and scoring crazy goals. However, I believe the controversial and eccentric brilliance of his life and of his career can be summed up with his performance on June 22nd, 1986, when he scored two of the most historic goals in World Cup history for Argentina versus England in front of a packed house at the Azteca Stadium. Of course, if you're a big-time soccer fan, you already know about these two goals from Maradona, the first being the controversial one, the hand of God, where he rose up in the penalty box and with a clenched fist somehow was able to punch the ball over the English goalkeeper into the net. Of course, there was no VAR back in the day, so there was no review. The goal stood. It's probably the most controversial goal in World Cup history. Of course, that goal represents all the bad stuff that he was responsible for during his life and his career. His failed drug test at the 1994 World Cup, which saw him kicked out. His clashes with the media, both as a player and as a coach. His erratic and crazy behavior in the stands at certain matches. And of course, the alcohol and drug problems that he developed over his life that attributed to his bad health and eventually, unfortunately, probably attributed to his early death. However, on the other side of the spectrum would be his second goal, his memorable 10-second, 60-yard dash right through the English defense, weaving and twisting his way through several defenders, eventually going past the goalkeeper and finishing off one of the greatest moves in World Cup history. Of course, represent all of the positives and all of the brilliance of his career, how he, in fact, was one of the greatest soccer players of all time, how he was able to shoulder the load for Argentina at that World Cup with all the responsibilities, with that country coming out of one of the tougher times in their history, to restore their glory, to bring them back another World Cup. And his ability to rise to the occasion in that moment and to shoulder that load was just truly incredible and one of the greatest individual performances in World Cup history. And of course, you can extend that out towards the rest of his career, how he left Barcelona for Napoli in a world transfer fee. People told him he was nuts. Don't go to that Italian side. They've done nothing. And yet he brought two Serie A titles towards Napoli and basically turned them from nothing into something. How he came up from a poor family, how he was able to overcome early obstacles in his life to have the career, to have the life that he was able to have. Maradona had so much responsibility, and as a smaller player, took such a beating from some of his opponents over the years, and yet he continued to push forward. He continued to score spectacular goals and to take on such a heavy burden for all of the clubs and for his country that he played for. And of course, again, going to YouTube and looking up so many clips over the years of his spectacular goals, it's just incredible what he was able to accomplish for where he came from and who he was as a soccer player. But again, it's really tough to kind of sum up someone's life and someone's career. But just to think about how he scored one goal on one side of the spectrum that was controversial and represented all of the bad stuff that he was responsible for in his life and his career. But on the other end, why he's such a big deal, the individual brilliance that he showed on the soccer pitch as a soccer player, how he was able to coach even Argentina to a quarterfinal berth at the 2010 World Cup. Again, you can't tell the story of soccer without Diego Maradona. Whether you loved him or you hated him, he was both a pleasure and a lesson to either enjoy or to learn from. He will be sadly missed in the world of soccer. So that's it. I just wanted to open up today's episode with my thoughts on the passing of Diego Maradona. Now I want to transition to the actual soccer. And of course, if you've been following the show for the past few weeks, you've kind of sensed the theme of when certain topics come up during the episodes. I kind of want to be able to mix it up from time to time and not get too stale. And I think this warrants being moved up into the show in terms of importance. We've got to talk some soccer in America here, and we've got to talk about these MLS playoffs. These have been the wildest MLS playoffs, at least in my memory. I don't know about in the history of the league, but these opening round matches, and now we, of course, have moved in towards the conference semifinals and finals, have just been spectacular as a neutral to watch. The sheer entertainment value and the drama right now cannot be matched anywhere else. Of course, the conditions haven't been perfect. I'm sure if I was a fan of a specific club that I wouldn't be as positive and ecstatic as I would be right now. But again, the drama entertainment value has just been phenomenal and have really lent to some really entertaining matches and some great finishes to see from all of these clubs that have been involved so far in the playoffs. So I'm going to start off with the Eastern Conference playoffs. We've made it to the conference final stage in the Eastern Conference. I believe that match will take place over the weekend. We're going to have two original members of MLS competing, which means one of them will move on to the MLS Cup final. I believe it's been several years since we've had an original member of MLS make it to the final, so it's good to see one of the more historic clubs make it to the final stage of the playoffs. It's going to be Columbus Crew SC taking on New England Revolution. As the number 3 seed, Columbus Crew started off the playoffs with a thrilling 3-2 victory over New York Red Bulls. They got goals from Pedro Santos, Darlington Nagbe, and Jossie Zardes, and goalkeeper Eloy Room was able to come up with a couple of clutch saves at the end to stave off the furious comeback from the Red Bulls. I believe St. Louis's own Tom Barlow had a chance to tie it late for New York, but Room is able to come up with a big save. The Crew then played Nashville SC to a very cagey 0-0 draw in normal time, but in extra time, once again, it was Santos and it was Zardes who were able to come up with a couple of goals on the counterattack, and Columbus was able to move on by beating Nashville 2-0. On the Revolution side, they've had to actually win one additional match as opposed to the two that the Crew had to win. The Revolution were involved in the play-in game. They beat the Montreal Impact 2-1 on a 95th minute winner from Gustavo Bo. It was a fantastic strike from outside the box, and it really set the tone for the Revolution in these playoffs. They went on to play the Supporters' Shield winners, the Philadelphia Union, the top seed in the Eastern Conference, and they controlled that match, and they came out of there with a 2-0 victory. Philly were actually unbeaten at home this season, and they were unbeaten versus the Revolution, so a very huge upset involved there in the Eastern Conference and saw the Revolution move on. Then lastly, they came up with a huge 3-1 victory versus Orlando City SC in Florida. Gustavo Bo had a couple goals in this match as well, and goalkeeper Matt Turner, who has been phenomenal, came up with a huge penalty stop against Nani and against Orlando, and that is how the Revolution have made it to the conference finals. It's going to be a really interesting match. We obviously see a couple of players stand out for both sides. For the Crew, you've got Nagbe, you've got Zardes, you've got Santos, who have really been leading that club on the offensive side. For the Revolution, it's been all about Gustavo Bo. It's all about Carlos Gil, who's really been helping out and providing some great service on these goals. All those guys are really great in the midfield. It's going to be a classic midfield clinic being put on between these two clubs. You got Caleb Porter, who's obviously led the club to the MLS Cup before, and of course, Bruce Arena, one of the legends of MLS, on the other side for the Revolution. Great coaching matchup, great matchup between these two clubs, and I'm really excited to see who will get to move on and represent the Eastern Conference in the final. However, though, I do want to talk about some of the earlier Eastern Conference matchups from these playoffs. And of course, you've got to start with that Orlando City SC, New York City FC match. I mean, you've never probably seen a crazier penalty kick shootout than what we were able to witness. Of course, the match was tied going through extra time. Orlando had already had a player sent off, so it was really a great job by them to get to a penalty kick shootout. You had a couple penalty kicks. You get to the very last one, and Orlando goalkeeper Pedro Galesi was able to stop it. Huge celebration. Orlando have won, but VAR intervenes and sees that Galesi actually stepped off his line. And because they were playing under 2019 rules, I believe, and not the new rules that they were implementing, it was determined that Galesi would get a yellow card. That was his second of the match. So he was awarded a red card and was sent off. Orlando tried to bring in a backup goalkeeper, but the referee said that it had to be someone who was already in the match. So field player Rodrigo Schlegel had to step in. He didn't save the first shot, but he then made the save on the second penalty he faced. Orlando would then make the following penalty, and they were able to move on. So the weird twists and turns didn't really impact the results of the penalty kick shootout. The rules were just terrible. Again, you're basically setting up a team to fail if you take off their starting goalkeeper in a penalty kick shootout. Again, I know that the rules basically got in the way. The rules were stupid. It was really unfortunate. There was a lot of confusion. The refs really didn't even know at times what they were doing. Thankfully, Orlando was still able to move on. That's one of the wildest scenes that I've ever seen. Again, shout out to Schlegel, who was able to come up with that huge penalty stop as a field player, filling in for Galesi. But that's obviously one of the most wild matches of these playoffs and really was a trend center because it was one of those first round matchups. I also want to give a shout out to Nashville SC. They won their first couple of matches, playoff matches, as a new club this season. They were able to beat Inter Miami CF 3-0 at home and then pulled off an upset of their own. They defeated Toronto FC in Toronto. Again, their defense was just fantastic. Columbus actually broke up 309 straight minutes of no goals. St. Louis's own Joe Willis put on a heck of a performance these playoffs. And again, tribute to Nashville, what they were able to do to get through their first season as an MLS club with all that had gone on with the pandemic. Just a truly amazing accomplishment and really, a benchmark for future MLS clubs, including STL City SC, to see what they can do in their first season. So hats off to Nashville. That Orlando match was crazy. And of course, we're going to see what happens here between Columbus and the New England Revolution. All right, now that we've gotten through the Eastern Conference playoffs, let's go over to the Western Conference. That final was pushed back a little bit. That's going to be on Monday night, and it's going to feature one team that seems like they're there every year and one new team. Let's start with the Seattle Sounders, who are back in the Western Conference final. Once again, they cruised past LAFC by a score of 3-1. They got goals from their big three, Jordan Morris, Raul Ruidiaz, and Nicolas Lodeiro. Then that set up a matchup against FC Dallas, and they were able to grind out another home victory there in a 1-0 decision. Again, Seattle have just been completely dominant. They're almost unbeatable at home, and they're just getting some great play right now from their big three. Lodeiro actually set a new MLS record with an assist in his sixth straight playoff game. Again, the offense is just fantastic, but the defense has stepped up and has played very well. And of course, you got Stefan Fry back there in goal, holding it down. The team they will be taking on is a little bit of a surprise, but I've talked about this team's balance throughout the season, and it's really paid off during this playoff run. Minnesota United FC. Minnesota are coming off back-to-back 3-0 decisions. They beat the Colorado Rapids in the first round, and then just the other night, they were able to take it to the number one seeded Sporting Kansas City. They opened up a huge lead early on in that game and did not look back, winning that, of course, by a score of 3-0 as well. They're getting great play right now from Kevin Molino. He's got 4 goals so far in these playoffs. He's scored twice in both games. They're also getting some great service from Emmanuel Reynoso, who's actually overtaken Lodeiro for the assist lead in these playoffs. He assisted on all 3 goals during that Sporting KC match. Again, think about this. Minnesota last season had the goalkeeper of the year, Vito Mannone, and the defender of the year, Ike Opara. They've been without both of them this season. Mannone went back over to England, I believe, and Opara has been out with this mysterious injury that they haven't really updated things about, but they're still clicking. The defense has been solid. The other night in that Sporting KC match, just some fantastic saves by their young goalkeeper, Dane St. Clair. They've been getting it done on both ends. I think they're really going to take it to Seattle. However, because they're the lower seed, Seattle once again hosts a playoff game. They've actually won 14 straight home playoff matches. Again, just the experience, the pedigree. You have to favor Seattle in this matchup, despite how good Minnesota are playing. But I think it's going to be a really close match. Could go to extra time. But again, I expect Seattle right now to be the prohibitive favorite, not just to win this match, but to go on to the MLS Cup and win it all once again. Before we move on, I do want to give my thoughts on some of the other Western Conference playoff matchups from previous rounds. I still think that Sporting KC, San Jose Earthquakes match, that first round match, is one of the match of the playoffs. It was 3-3 in normal time with the 97th minute equalizer from who else but San Jose Earthquakes striker Chris Wondolowski in what was his final match of his professional career. A tremendous way to go out. Unfortunately, obviously, they weren't able to get things done, but still, that's Wando, always coming up with clutch goals in the box. However, the real star of that match was the KC goalkeeper, Tim Mila, who was able to stop all three of the penalty kicks he faced in that shootout and got Sporting KC the dub. He's actually, I believe, undefeated in penalty kick shootouts in his career. That's a fantastic accomplishment for a goalkeeper. Elsewhere, I thought FC Dallas's win over Portland Timbers was pretty impressive. They were down 1-0 late in that match, but 17-year-old Ricardo Pepi was able to get in behind the defense and score in stoppage time to take that game to extra time. It would eventually go to a shootout, and Dallas would outlast the Timbers, winning it 8-7. And then lastly, I think, again, despite the fact that we've had the pandemic, they weren't at full strength without Golden Boot winner Diego Rossi. Carlos Vela was hurt or out for different points of the year. I still think it's a major disappointment that LAFC were not able to get past the first round. I know Seattle's a tough opponent. They basically put themselves there in that spot, but still, they've got a lot of defensive questions that they need to get answered still. There were a lot of positives. The Bradley Wright Phillips signing was one of the best of the season, but in terms of the goals that they've set for themselves, they want to break in and be like the Galaxy and start getting some titles. They have a lot of roster questions that they need answered in the offseason. So, again, it's been a very entertaining playoff so far. The Western Conference has still had some great games, not quite like that penalty kick shootout in the Orlando NYCFC match, but it's been very good. And once again, not a shocker to me, at least, that we have Seattle and Minnesota representing the Western Conference. All right, it's tough to follow up what's going on in MLS right now, but I do want to get to some women's soccer news from the past few weeks. And of course, I want to start off with the U.S. women's national team. They took on the Netherlands in the friendly, their first action since March. This was also the first matchup between the two countries since the 2019 FIFA World Cup final. And the U.S., once again, by a familiar scoreline, were able to defeat the Netherlands 2-0. Rose Lavelle and Christy Mewis were the two women who got on the score sheet, and another very impressive display by the U.S. women's national team. You saw a lot of regulars make the start, or at least make appearances in this match. You had Alex Morgan coming on close to halftime after a long layoff from her. But you saw the likes of Crystal Dunn, Becky Sauerbrunn, Sam Mewis, Rose Lavelle, all over the place again. Most of the U.S. regulars were involved in this match. And again, looked very impressive after a long layoff, like they hadn't missed a beat. And it was really actually cool to see a couple of women who haven't been involved as much with the national team. Someone like maybe like a Lynn Williams, who got to start up front for the team, but also to see a couple of debuts that were really impactful as well. You had Sophia Smith from the Portland Thorns, and you had Florida State's Jalen Howell get to make their debuts for the senior team. Again, a very thorough display from Vlatko Andonovski's team. While I'm pretty sure we won't see the U.S. women's national team again before the end of 2020, hopefully in 2021, we'll get to see a lot more of them than we have. Some other big news broke this week concerning the U.S. women's national team. It was announced on Tuesday that the U.S. Soccer Federation and members of the U.S. women's national team had agreed to a settlement of the portion of the lawsuit concerning unequal working conditions, things such as equal number of charter flights, better hotel accommodations, expansions of the senior staff are rumored to be part of the settlement. However, something that still has not been settled between the two sides has to deal with unequal pay and wage discrimination. That part of the lawsuit is still ongoing. The part of the original lawsuit still has not been settled as of yet. And that's obviously the main thing, right? It's good that there was a breakthrough here, that the women's national team are finally getting some of the perks and some of the things that they should be getting already, but hadn't been getting from the U.S. Soccer Federation. But the wage gap, the wage discrimination is still the biggest part of this ongoing battle between the two sides. Hopefully they're somehow able to make some type of headway in the coming months and years, but it's going to be a long battle. I know these women have been very dedicated to it. Hopefully something happens along the way where they're able to finally break through and bridge this gap. It's good to get an early win here, but we're still looking for that big news on wage discrimination. And then lastly, a couple of smaller stories here. We did have a pretty big trade in the NWSL this week. U.S. Women's National Team veteran Kelly O'Hara was traded from the Utah Royals to the Washington Spirit in exchange for $75,000 in allocation money and a potential 2022 first-round pick if O'Hara plays in a certain amount of games for the Spirit. Really big trade here for the Spirit. They needed some depth and needed some acquisitions to help replace Rose Lavelle. Obviously, those two play different positions, but it's still good to get a big name in to help out the Spirit. And, of course, O'Hara is a great veteran. She only played a certain amount of matches for Utah. I think she only played in 14 matches over 3 seasons. She was injured a lot, but hopefully she can bring some experience, and if she's healthy, will be able to contribute to Washington and help make up for some of the losses that they've had with Lavelle and others. And then lastly, I just wanted to give a shout out to Sarah Fuller. She is the goalkeeper for Vanderbilt's women's soccer program, who actually just won the SEC championship. She became the first woman in the history of college football to play in a Power 5 conference game when she kicked off the second half for Vanderbilt against Mizzou. Just a tremendous, glass-shattering, barrier-breaking moment that she was able to be involved, that she was recruited by Vanderbilt, and that she got to have at least this moment. I wish they could have done a little bit better and gotten her a field goal opportunity, but still, just another great moment for women's sports to have this story and to be able to put a spotlight on not just her, but Vanderbilt soccer as well. And hopefully, more of these opportunities are given to her, and hopefully she paves the way for other, young girls and women who want to chase their dreams and be a part of this movement. So again, congrats to Sarah on having this moment, and looking forward to her career and seeing what more she can do here in this role. And then real quickly to close out the Soccer in America segment here, looking to some USL Championship news. Oakland Roots SC announced the first player signing in their USL Championship history, and that would be defensive midfielder Salih Muhammad, who actually is a California native. He's been playing at New Mexico United for the past few seasons. He's made 37 appearances over the past 2 seasons for the club. Again, very exciting news for Oakland to get their first player signing, and the fact that he's from California even makes it a bigger bonus. Again, really looking forward to how they're able to build out their squad here during this offseason. Then I also want to talk a little bit about the trend so far with the USL Championship. Obviously, we're in the offseason, and players are moving or at least signing up with their old clubs, and that seems to be the main theme. We've seen a lot of guys across the USL re-sign with their clubs. You've got guys like Indy 11's Tyler Pashner, Tampa Bay Rowdy's Sebastian Guinzati, and Forrest Lasso, the reigning USL Championship Defender of the Year, and San Antonio FC's Jose Gallegos, who is in the running, I believe, at least, if not named, the USL Championship Young Player of the Year. All of these guys are returning to their clubs, and of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think that makes sense, right? With the pandemic, we don't really know how the 2021 season is going to look. Stability and continuity is key, not just for on-the-field performance, but also for off-the-field conditions as well. So I'm not surprised. There's going to be still a lot of player movement, but for right now, some of the bigger names in the USL Championship are sticking with their old clubs. All right, now it's time to talk about the UEFA Champions League. We've made it to the final match day 6. That'll be going down on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. Of course, we just had a great match day 5 over this past week. I'm going to get a little bit into some of the matches from this past week, but I want to mainly focus on each one of the individual groups and what's at stake on the final match day and who could potentially qualify from each group. So I'm going to start off with Group A. Bayern Munich ran away with this group. They've already comfortably qualified not only for the next round, but as the top team from this group. Despite the injuries that they've had to the likes of Alphonso Davies and Joshua Kimmich, they've just been fantastic. They basically rolled through everybody in that group. They look to be the prohibitive favorites as the defending champs. Second place in this group, there's a little bit of mystery to it. I think Atletico Madrid should still be favored to move on, but they have not looked very good. If you actually look at their goal scoring record, it's the exact same as Lokomotiv Moscow, who are in last place of this group. They only have one result in difference. Right now, Madrid, they only need a draw versus FC Salzburg to move on as the second place team in that group. But Salzburg, as we've seen, are a pretty good goal scoring team. If they're able to break down Atletico's defense and their offense isn't on point, we could see an upset, and if Salzburg are able to come up with the victory, they will move on. I still like Madrid. João Felix has looked really good outside of some of the other problems that they've had. I think they'll have enough to move on here. But in terms of going forward, it might be a good time to play Atletico. I know Diego Simeone's side have been tough to break down in the past, but right now, in terms of current form, it might be a good time to play those guys. Next up, Group B. Got to be tied at least for the most exciting and intriguing group from this group stage. And it's the only group where all four sides are alive to potentially advance to the knockout stage. It's the only group of its kind, and you rarely see it where we get to the final match day and all four teams are alive. How is that possible? Well, once again, Shakhtar Donetsk were able to come up with an upset over Real Madrid. They beat them 2-0. Again, I don't know what Madrid are doing. I know that they've had certain injuries. We just saw Eden Hazard once again go down with an injury over the weekend, but they just look completely out of sorts. Once again, Donetsk, they're a fine side. They've made it to the knockout stage at different points of the past few seasons, and they've looked the part so far in this group in terms of offense, and they were just able to completely take it to Madrid and really cast some doubt over if they'll be able to advance. On the other end of the group, you had Inter Milan, who came up with a huge 3-2 victory in Germany versus Borussia Mönchengladbach. Romelu Lukaku, who's had a really great season for them, came up with 2 goals and was really able to help out his club get the victory. So where do things stand in this group? Right now, Inter have the toughest path to advance. They need to beat Shakhtar Donetsk at home, but they also need to have Real Madrid lose to Mönchengladbach. With Shakhtar, it's rather straightforward. They need to match Madrid's result in the other match in order for them to advance because they have the tiebreaker in the head-to-head with Madrid. Mönchengladbach, who currently actually sit right now at the top of the group, they only need a draw versus Madrid for them to advance. And when it comes to Real Madrid advancing out of the group, they either need to beat Mönchengladbach to advance, or if Inter were to beat Shakhtar, then Madrid only need a draw versus the German club in order to advance. All right, moving into Group C real quick. Both of those spots have been locked up. You've got Manchester City clinching the top spot in their group. They've looked pretty good, especially on offense in this group. You've got guys like Ferran Torres who have been really able to find their form, specifically in the Champions League. And you've got FC Porto, who were able to pick up wins against the other 2 clubs, Marseille and Olympiacos, in this group in order to advance in that second spot. You just saw City draw with Porto 0-0. I think, again, City, even though in some of these matches they've gotten off to slow starts, and you think about the 1-0 victory they just had over Olympiacos, they're still going to be one of the favorites. I think that they're just biding their time. They're waiting to get Sergio Aguero back and some of those other guys from injuries in order to be fully stocked and loaded for this knockout stage. Moving on to Group D, where there's still a little bit of drama left heading into the final match day, but we can't say for certain that Liverpool have clinched the top spot in that group. They gritted out a 1-0 victory versus Ajax. Again, with that depleted side that they had, they were able to come up with that clutch victory to take the top spot in that group. And on the final match day, we're going to get Ajax versus Atalanta. Ajax need to beat Atalanta in order to advance, whereas the Italian side, they just need a draw, even with the draw they picked up there over this past game week. Again, it's going to be really exciting. 2 great attacking sides with a lot of offensive talent. Both sides, despite their second place finish, would be quite dangerous outs here in the knockout stage. Next up, Group B, where you have Chelsea, who clinched the top spot in their group with a dominating 4-0 victory versus Sevilla this week. Olivier Giroud, who, again, please do not sell him, guys. He is so valuable to this club as a striker who can immediately come in. Just the way that he plays and his ability to hold up the ball, get into the box, and his just incredible finishing rate. He needs to stick around with the club. I know they've been talking about selling him, but he scored all 4 goals in a fantastic display. And Chelsea were able to rest a couple of guys. Christian Pulisic got the start, looked pretty good in his first real substantive action since his long-term injury. And again, Chelsea, fantastic job, great defensive rate in this group. Sevilla still qualify as the second-place team in this group. Of course, they've gotten a lot of experience over the past few years in the Europa League, but they're going to be sticking around for now and heading into the knockout stage. As for Chelsea, again, they get to avoid teams like Bayern Munich and some of the other top clubs in Europe. Hopefully, they're able to get a good draw, at least from my perspective, at least they get a good draw and continue their run in the Champions League. Moving on to Group F, the combination of Club Brugge's 3-0 victory over Zenit St. Petersburg and Borussia Dortmund's 1-1 draw versus Lazio means there's still one final spot left in this group to qualify for the knockout stage on the final match day. Borussia Dortmund, they are already in. They're just waiting to see what their seeding will be, and they're going to find that out. Obviously, if they get a positive result versus Zenit St. Petersburg, they will most likely top the group. But of course, the big match in this group will be Club Brugge traveling to Italy to take on Lazio. Lazio, they only need a draw to move on, whereas Bruges, they need to come up with one more final victory in this group. They've done an excellent job of nicking off points from all the other clubs in this group, but they need one more victory in order to move on towards the next round. I think Lazio are going to be able to do it. Ciro Immobile, if you haven't looked this guy up, he's one of the top scorers in Serie A. He's been doing some phenomenal work for Lazio. Again, once again, scored in midweek, great on penalties, great goal scorer, someone who has been able to help lead this club, and in my mind, most likely is going to lead them out of the group stage. Next up in Group G, we've known for quite a while now that FC Barcelona and Juventus will be moving on to the knockout stage. We just need to figure out who wins the group. It's most likely going to be Barcelona because Juventus need to beat them by a 3-goal margin on the final match day in order to flip the script and to take the top spot in that group. I just don't see that happening. I know Barcelona right now, they're a little bit hit with some defensive injuries, but I still think they'll be able to get it done. Hopefully, though, Messi was rested for this match in midweek. Hopefully Messi comes back. I really would like to see Messi versus Ronaldo. We didn't get that the first time around because of Ronaldo's positive COVID-19 case. Hopefully we get it this time. We know both teams are moving on, though, and they're going to be tough outs no matter what in the knockout stage. And then last but certainly not least, outside of Group B, this has got to be the most entertaining and most drama-filled group of the Champions League. I'm talking about Group H, and this group, of course, involves 3 teams who all have a chance to qualify for the next round on the final match day. I'm talking about Manchester United, I'm talking about PSG, and I'm talking about RB Leipzig. The day actually started off in midweek with Leipzig just being a part of an incredible 7-goal thriller with Istanbul. They had taken several leads in the match, but Istanbul kept scoring, kept equalizing the match, and it took a very late match winner, late into stoppage time, to get the 4-3 victory for Leipzig to keep them in contention for qualification. Then, of course, we moved into United versus PSG, and PSG, with both Neymar and Mbappe in the lineup, just ran roughshod over that United defense. They beat them 3-1. United really were lucky to get a deflection on that Marcus Rashford goal. Otherwise, they could have been shut out. It was just a really great display from Neymar and Mbappe, who they just could not track. They couldn't keep up with his speed. And that, of course, leaves all 3 sides on 9 points headed into the final match day. PSG, they've got the easiest road towards the next round of the Champions League. They just need a draw at home versus Istanbul. Of course, I think they're most likely going to win that match, and I think they're going to find a way to top the group with that result. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got Manchester United versus RB Leipzig. United have the advantage. They only need a draw versus the German club in order to advance. Leipzig have to win in order to get out of that group. Of course, United would like to top the group, but at this point, with the drop points they just had to PSG, they just need to find a way to get into the next round. It's the same old story with them in terms of the offense and the defense just not really matching up. If they can get their lineup straight, I know people were upset about Fred's second yellow because he got the ball with that tackle. But again, with the malicious follow through that he had, he was also pretty lucky to be on the pitch still because he got away with that kind of headbutt situation early on in the match where he only really got a yellow card for it. So again, I think that evened out either way, even if you don't agree with the second yellow on the tackle. Just, you can't be putting guys like that into the lineup when you're playing a club such as PSG. Somebody like a Paul Pogba needs to be in that match. I know obviously they've had struggles with him in terms of injury and form, but you got to be playing your best lineup. I expect to see a pretty star-studded lineup versus Leipzig on the final match day. I still favor United to advance out of this group. I don't know if they'll be in first. I think PSG will take this group, but I still like them ahead of Leipzig on the final match day. So, of course, very excited for the end of the Champions League group stage. Match day 6 will happen on Tuesday and Wednesday of this next week. Again, like I said, some big-time matches. You got Barcelona versus Juventus, United versus RB Leipzig, Atalanta versus Ajax, with a lot of implications and qualifying spots on the line. Should be a thrilling finish towards that stage of the tournament. Now I want to transition over to my bread and butter, which is the Premier League. Again, I know lots going on with La Liga, Serie A, and the Bundesliga and some of the other leagues, but the Premier League, again, I think is still the best covered, especially in terms of here in the U.S. and it's the league that I've been following the longest. So I want to get into what's been going on there. Obviously, we're coming up on the holiday schedule, the Boxing Day schedule, which is really going to throw a wrench into some of these clubs that are dealing with a lot of injuries, specifically with Liverpool, who I want to talk about first. Again, I've already discussed this. They are missing Trent Alexander-Arnold. They are missing the reigning player of the year, Virgil van Dijk. They are missing Joe Gomez, who's been an excellent center back for them. They've had injury problems with Jordan Henderson in the midfield. Mo Salah recently tested positive for COVID-19. They've just got a lot of problems over there, but they are still within striking distance right now of the top of the table. I believe they are tied on points technically with Tottenham right now going into the weekend. In terms of this week, they had a really impressive 3-0 victory over Leicester City, who are near the top half of that table as well. But they had a little bit of a setback this past weekend versus Brighton. They were held to a 1-1 draw. I know VAR was heavily involved in that match in terms of disallowing goals and giving Brighton penalties. And I know Jurgen Klopp kind of blew up with the media over that match because also James Milner got hurt as well in that match. So again, there's a lot of right now pressure on Liverpool to find a way to get through this holiday schedule with the thin roster that they have. They're not going to be able to get reinforcements until after this month, I believe. But again, it just kind of shows the championship pedigree of Klopp, of all of these guys to get through this tough time, to make it through to the next round in the Champions League as well. And I think that they're going to be fine. I've seen it now for the past few weeks. The defensive structure that they still have Alisson at the back in goal. I think they're going to be able to find a way. They've got a tough challenge coming up here in the middle of the month, which I'll talk about here in a second. But for the most part, I think Liverpool are going to find a way to just be okay. Moving on to a couple of clubs who are looking to challenge for the Premier League title, and that would be Chelsea and Tottenham. Those clubs met last weekend at Stamford Bridge, and they played to a 0-0 draw, rather unexciting 0-0 draw. I'm not entirely surprised, though. I mean, it is Jose Mourinho in a big match, so I don't want to say that they parked the bus, that they parked something, though, and Chelsea were just unable to really get some surefire chances. I know Timo Werner put the ball in the back of the net, but he was just a yard or two off sides. But still, it was a really good clash between these two sides. It keeps Chelsea within 2 points of Spurs, who are right now at the top of the table. And I guess the big question is, with the slow starts across the board with Liverpool and Man City and Manchester United, are Chelsea and Tottenham true title contenders? And I think that the clear answer to that question is yes, they are true title contenders. Just look at their defensive records. Right now, Spurs and Chelsea are 1-2 in terms of fewest goals conceded. With Tottenham, they've had a complete transformation under Mourinho. They look like one of his classic sides that do great in his second full season. Of course, you got Harry Kane and Heung-min Son, who are doing great things on the offensive end, but that defense has been spectacular. For Chelsea, the main thing would have to be the defense, of course. Thiago Silva and Edouard Mendy, I believe, are the two biggest impact players who have really helped out the Chelsea defense. The clean sheets, again, that they've been able to keep and have this great run have just been fantastic. And of course, up front, they're starting to get some guys back in terms of full health. Pulisic is back now. You've got Timo Werner, who is struggling a little bit, maybe could use a bit of a break, but still, you like him to get back into form. They just got so many options right now at the front, and the defense has finally caught up to the offense. So I think that, yes, both these clubs are going to be near the top part of the table. I think they're going to push Liverpool and Man City when they eventually catch up and get into that top 4 spot. But we're going to really know, especially about Tottenham in a couple weeks. They take on Liverpool on December 16th. It's a midweek match, I believe, on a Wednesday. We're going to know a little bit more about Tottenham. Liverpool are still going to be with a lot of guys out. I think Spurs should definitely try to take advantage, put some distance between them and Liverpool. If they're able to get a positive result, especially 3 points in that match, I think that will solidify their case as true title contenders. On a separate note, someone who I don't think is going to be challenging for the title this season would be Manchester United. On the positive side to start, they've moved up from 15th into 9th place in the table, so they've been making some great sides. They've been picking up some wins. They just recently beat Southampton 3-2. Edison Cavani came on at halftime and completely changed the course of that match and really helped out Manchester United. He just gives them a different dynamic up top, a big, strong forward to aim for, and to sometimes getting behind the defense, and he's just got a great finishing ability. But again, it's really tough to be positive about United when they're still having these defensive lapses. I continue to harp on how this is such a huge problem for the club. I don't think this makes them title contenders. It's their one flaw. I know in January they will probably bring in a transfer or two, but for right now, they just have too many problems there. I also think in the central midfield. If you don't have a fully fit or a fully on-form Paul Pogba, it just takes away so much from that club. You've got some problems with Anthony Martial. I mean, he's missed that sitter versus PSG here in the Champions League. He just doesn't look to be on form right now. You got Bruno Fernandes, of course. He's been doing fantastic work. You got Marcus Rashford, but right now, United just don't look to be 100% raring and ready to go. And I think that they've already lost so much ground already. There are just too many teams, Liverpool, Man City, Tottenham, Chelsea, that are just going to be in their way and prevent them from really making a true title challenge. And then lastly, real quick, I do want to address the bottom of the table. It looks to be that we're pretty much set as to which teams will be in contention, unfortunately, for relegation. I'm talking about these 4 clubs. I'm talking about Fulham. I'm talking about West Brom. I'm talking about Burnley. And I'm talking about Sheffield United. In Fulham's case, it's the same old problem that got them relegated a few seasons ago. They've got the worst defensive record in the league. They've been scoring a few more goals lately to help out, but it's still a problem at the back. They just cannot get the right combination of center backs to really plug the leaks that they've had in defense. I just don't think they're going to be able to stop enough teams in order to save themselves from relegation. With the other 3 clubs, West Brom, Sheffield, and Burnley, they just don't have the scoring record. They have not reached 10 goals as a club so far yet this season. They have a couple guys on each club that are capable of scoring a decent amount of goals, but as a team, they just do not have the firepower to match some of these different clubs. You think about Burnley and Sheffield, especially Sheffield last year, how fantastic they were. It was all because of their defensive structure, their backbone. I don't want to put it too much on Dean Henderson going back from his loan from Manchester United. I think it's more so has to do with the defense. With Burnley, it's the same thing. The goalkeeper, Nick Pope, is still there. They're just not as good defensively this year as they have been. And when you're not as good defensively and the offense is still struggling like it did last season, you're going to come up with these types of results for Sheffield and Burnley. So unless those 3 other clubs, you've thrown West Brom as well, can find a way to get some consistent goals from their offense, they're going to be in trouble. And then with Fulham, the defense is going to let them down. I don't know which 3 of those 4 will be the final result and who will get relegated, but I do believe that the bottom of the table has already been established. All right, to wrap up the show, I wanted to talk about the 2 biggest stories coming out of the St. Louis soccer scene from this past week. Let's start with St. Louis City SC. On Wednesday morning, the club provided an update on the construction of the new downtown stadium. They provided some new renderings of that stadium, which included new entries, design enhancements, new pitch-level lodge boxes, and upper-level outdoor terraces. We got a quote here from the brand new Chief Experience Officer, Matt Seebeck, who said, "The stadium design will provide our fans with an incredible amount of game day variety, compelling sightlines, and high energy." The club and their architecture partners announced also the completion of the early construction phase, with the next big milestone of placing the structural steel of the stadium in the ground coming this month. I think that was the big thing that I got from these new renderings. They want the stadium to be open. They want to be able to display the full grace and beauty of our city. You could see the picture there with the Ferris wheel just outside of the stadium. Of course, being able to see the arch also during the night game will surely be fantastic. Love seeing the supporter section, the standing supporter section as well. I don't know if those pitch level boxes are going to work out. The logistics of those boxes there, I mean, they're just like NBA courtside seats, right? They're, of course, really cool, but the dangers and the logistics of those seats may not actually work out. But I get it. This club, they want to be different. They want to be modern. They want to provide a game day experience unlike any other. Go for it. Let's see what happens. I'm interested to see how they work those out. But that's what I really got from these new renderings. They want to be modern, they want to be innovative, and they want to bring a lot of excitement, and they want to showcase our city. So again, really cool to see those renderings. Also to know that the construction process is on schedule and that they'll be putting in the steel here in the coming month. Good updates all around from the club, and hopefully the process continues to go on schedule. In other news, the first former St. Louis FC players began signing with new teams this week. Joaquin Rivas returned to FC Tulsa for his second stint with the club after scoring 17 goals for them during the 2017 and 2018 seasons. Center back Toby Adewale signed with the Western Conference champs Phoenix Rising FC. It'll be his first stint with a Western Conference team after spending his entire career in the Eastern Conference with Pittsburgh Riverhounds SC and St. Louis FC. So hats off to those 2 guys. Obviously, there'll be more news and more players are going to sign elsewhere, but these were the first 2. They were both a pleasure to talk to when they were with St. Louis FC. Of course, obviously with Joaquin, he's got a great history with FC Tulsa, a club who are on the rise. They obviously took it to St. Louis during the regular season with that 2-0 victory. And with Toby, he is, of course, joining an organization with quite the pedigree, with quite the expectations of not only making the playoffs, but winning the whole thing. It's going to be awesome for him to be able to play in that type of environment and get to experience playing for a top club. So congrats to those two guys. Wish them nothing but the best and looking forward to them continuing their careers in the USL Championship. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Gateway to Soccer show. It was great to be back talking some soccer with you all. I hope to have a guest for next week's show, and I'm looking forward to all the action over this next week with the Champions League, the MLS playoffs, and everything else going on in this world. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for tuning in as always, and I hope everybody has a great weekend.